I gave my apartment to my parents. 5 months later, my brother, who stole my wife, posted, "Many thanks to my parents for giving me this apartment. Finally have my own place with my wife." So I showed them who the real owner. So here's the deal. My name's Marcus, I'm 34 years old, and if there's one thing I've learned in my spectacularly mediocre existence, it's that family loyalty is basically a one-way street where I'm the only schmuck driving in the right direction. You know those heartwarming family sitcoms where everyone hugs at the end and learns valuable life lessons? Yeah, well, growing up in my house was more like watching a train wreck in slow motion, except the train was on fire, and somehow I was always the one getting blamed for the smoke. Let me paint you a picture of my childhood, because apparently trauma builds character, or whatever self-help books tell people these days. I had this younger brother Tyler, still do, unfortunately, and this kid was like a tiny tornado of chaos wrapped in Superman pajamas. From the moment he could walk, which seemed suspiciously early now that I think about it, Tyler made it his life's mission to systematically destroy everything I held dear. We're talking full-scale warfare here, people. He'd steal my action figures and claim he found them under his bed, swipe my brand-new sneakers right out of the box because apparently his feet grew overnight. And don't even get me started on Halloween. Every single October 31st, I'd wake up to find my carefully curated candy stash completely ransacked, with nothing left but those weird peanut butter taffy things that taste like sadness wrapped in orange wax. And what did my loving, supportive parents do about this systematic theft? Oh, they had the perfect response every damn time. "Marcus, honey, he's the baby. Just let him have it." Let him have it? Lady, the kid was 6 years old and built like a linebacker. When exactly does the baby excuse expire? But no, Tyler could have burned down the garage, and Mom would have probably said something like, "Well, he's just exploring his creative side." Meanwhile, if I so much as looked at Tyler's stuff sideways, suddenly I was the bad guy corrupting America's youth. I guess nobody in my family had the foresight to realize that a kid who steals Halloween candy might eventually graduate to bigger and better things. Like, oh, I don't know, maybe stealing his older brother's wife? But I'm getting ahead of myself here, because that particular dumpster fire is a whole other chapter in the Marcus Hall of Shame. Fast forward through years of this nonsense. Me working my ass off through college while Tyler discovered that PlayStation controllers were apparently the only things his hands were good for. And I finally managed to scrape together enough money to buy my own place. And when I say scrape together, I mean I lived off ramen noodles for approximately 3 years straight, worked more overtime shifts than a coffee shop barista during finals week, and spent my evenings praying to whatever gods control the real estate market that I'd find something, anything, that wouldn't require me to sell a kidney on the black market. After months of looking at apartments that made prison cells look spacious, I found it. A 2-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood where the neighbors didn't seem to be running meth labs or hosting underground cockfighting rings. It wasn't the Taj Mahal or anything. We're talking basic white walls, carpet that had seen better decades, and a kitchen so small you had to step outside to change your mind. But it was mine. 100%, legally documented, mortgage-paying mine. I had the paperwork, the keys, and that smug satisfaction that comes with finally having your own space where nobody can tell you what to do or steal your food from the fridge. But here's where my brilliant brain decided to get all sentimental and stupid. See, while I was busy living the American dream of crippling debt and furniture from Target, my parents were still crammed into this studio apartment that made a shoebox look like a mansion. Their neighbors were apparently training for the world's loudest argument championships every single night, with bonus points for creative cursing and the occasional sound of furniture being thrown against walls. The place was so small that when Dad opened the refrigerator, Mom had to step into the bathroom just to give him room to grab a beer. So what did good old Marcus do? Did I enjoy my newfound freedom and personal space like any sensible human being? Oh, hell no. I looked at my parents living in that cramped nightmare and thought, you know what? I should help them out. They raised me. They dealt with Tyler's reign of terror for all those years, and they deserve better than listening to their neighbors reenact Jerry Springer episodes at 2 in the morning. It seemed like such a noble, generous thing to do at the time. I mean, what kind of son would I be if I just ignored my parents' suffering while I enjoyed having enough room to actually walk around my own living room? So I made the decision that would later go down in history as one of the stupidest moves in the Marcus Chronicles. I decided to let them move into my apartment. Looking back now, I should have known better. These were the same parents who gave away my Game Boy because Tyler looked sad. These were the people who somehow never noticed when Tyler would borrow my homework and turn it in with his name on it. But no, I was feeling all warm and fuzzy about being the good son, the responsible one, the guy who actually made something of himself and wanted to share the wealth. God, I was such an idiot. Now let me tell you about Rachel, because apparently my life wasn't complicated enough without adding a wife who'd eventually become my own personal Judas. When I first met Rachel, I thought I'd finally caught a break from the universe's ongoing campaign to make my existence as miserable as possible. She had this smile that could probably end wars, a laugh that made you forget you were paying taxes on everything you owned, and legs that went on for days like a never-ending highway to heaven. Plus, she actually seemed to think I was funny, which honestly should have been my first red flag because my sense of humor is basically just thinly veiled trauma wrapped in sarcasm. We met at some corporate mixer where everyone pretended to care about synergy and thinking outside the box, while secretly wondering if the open bar had decent whiskey. Rachel worked in marketing for some company that sold things to other companies. You know, one of those jobs where nobody can really explain what they do, but somehow everyone makes decent money. She wore this little black dress that probably cost more than my car payment, and when she laughed at my joke about the terrible shrimp cocktail, I figured maybe karma was finally throwing me a bone. 6 months later, we were married. Looking back, maybe we moved a little fast. But when you've spent most of your adult life watching Netflix alone while eating cereal for dinner, meeting someone who actually wants to share their popcorn feels like hitting the relationship lottery. Rachel moved into my apartment. Remember, the one I'd worked my ass off to afford. And for a while there, life was actually pretty good. She'd cook these elaborate dinners that didn't come from a microwave box. We'd binge-watch shows that weren't just documentaries about serial killers. And I started thinking maybe I'd finally figured out this whole adult thing. But then Tyler started showing up to our dinner parties. Now, let me explain something about Tyler for those who missed the memo. This is a guy whose greatest achievement in life was once eating an entire pizza by himself without throwing up. His idea of ambition was upgrading from Xbox 360 to Xbox One, and his longest relationship before Rachel lasted about as long as a TikTok video. The dude lived in mom and dad's basement until he was 28. Not because he was saving money for anything important, but because doing laundry required more life skills than he possessed. So when Tyler suddenly started appearing at our dinner table with this newfound interest in hanging out with his big brother, I should have been suspicious. But like the trusting idiot I apparently am, I figured maybe he was finally trying to mature or bond with me or some other Hallmark movie nonsense. "Hey Marcus," he'd say, showing up uninvited with that goofy grin that made him look like a golden retriever who'd just discovered bacon. "Thought I'd drop by and see how married life's treating you." At first, it was just dinner once a week. Then it became twice a week. Then somehow Tyler was practically living at our place, always with some excuse about why he needed to be there. "My internet's down," he'd say, which was code for, "I forgot to pay the bill again." Or, "Mom's driving me crazy," which was code for, "She asked me to get a job." My personal favorite was, "I think there's a gas leak at my place," which was probably code for, "I left the stove on and now everything smells like burnt ramen." And Rachel? Sweet, beautiful, apparently not as smart as I thought Rachel would just smile and say, "Of course Tyler can stay for dinner." Or, "Oh, Tyler needs help with his Wi-Fi? You should definitely help him." "Yeah, Rachel, Wi-Fi." Because that's obviously what my grown-ass brother needed help with at 9 o'clock at night. I started noticing little things that should have set off every alarm bell in my thick skull. Like how Rachel would suddenly put on makeup before Tyler came over, even though she'd spent the whole day in sweatpants looking perfectly content. Or how she'd laugh just a little too hard at Tyler's jokes, which wasn't even that impressive considering Tyler's idea of comedy was making fart noises with his armpit. She'd find excuses to sit next to him on the couch, always claiming the other spots weren't comfortable, and somehow their conversations would continue long after I'd gone to bed. But the real kicker? Tyler would ask Rachel for help with the most ridiculous stuff. "Rachel, can you help me pick out clothes for this job interview?" Never mind that the job interview was at GameStop and Tyler's wardrobe consisted entirely of graphic tees and jeans with mysterious stains. Rachel, what do you think about this apartment I'm looking at? Even though we all knew Tyler couldn't afford anything better than a cardboard box, and that's only if the cardboard box came with free Wi-Fi and a gaming setup. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, Rachel married me, not Tyler. She chose the guy with the steady job, the apartment, the ability to remember to pay bills before they got shut off. What could she possibly see in my brother, whose greatest life skill was opening beer bottles with random household objects? Turns out, quite a lot apparently. The beginning of the end came on a Tuesday evening that started normal enough. I got home from work expecting to find Rachel making dinner or watching one of those reality shows where rich people argue about problems that aren't actually problems. Instead, I found an empty apartment with a note on the kitchen counter that might as well have been written in neon lights. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Or, working late. On a Tuesday. At a marketing company that practically shut down after 5 p.m. because everyone there had the work ethic of a vacation resort in the off-season. Hours passed. Then more hours. My calls went straight to voicemail, my texts stayed unread, and I started wondering if maybe she'd been abducted by aliens or fallen into a time warp or literally anything other than what my brain was slowly starting to piece together. Finally, around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text message that would go down in history as the most pathetic breakup attempt in human civilization. Marcus, I think I'm better off with Tyler. Don't try to interfere. Don't try to interfere? Lady, I hadn't even figured out what was happening yet, and you're already telling me not to interfere? And better off with Tyler? We're talking about the same Tyler who once called me crying because he couldn't figure out how to change the time on his microwave after daylight saving time. You know what's worse than losing your wife to your loser brother? Having to see their happy little romance playing out everywhere you go like some twisted version of the Truman Show. Except instead of being the star, you're the guy everyone points at and whispers, "Hey, isn't that the dude whose wife ran off with his brother?" Yeah, that was my life for about 3 weeks after Rachel's spectacular exit via text message. I'm talking full-scale nightmare territory here, people. I couldn't grab a coffee without running into them, making googly eyes at each other over shared muffins at the corner cafe. I'd hit the gym to work out my frustrations on some innocent treadmill, and boom, there they'd be, Tyler attempting to spot Rachel on the bench press like he knew the first thing about proper lifting form. The guy who once pulled a muscle reaching for the TV remote was suddenly Mr. Fitness Instructor, and Rachel was eating it up like it was prime ribeye instead of grade D bullshit. But the absolute worst was the gas station incident. Picture this. I'm just trying to fill up my tank and grab some overpriced energy drinks to fuel my descent into caffeinated madness, when I see Tyler's beat-up Honda parked at pump number 3. And there's my ex-wife. Sorry, my brother's new girlfriend. Because apparently we're not calling it what it really is. Pumping gas while Tyler sits in the driver's seat, probably playing some mobile game where you match colored candy or whatever passes for entertainment in his tiny brain. Rachel saw me first. We made eye contact for about half a second, and I watched her face go through this whole emotional journey. Surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally that look people get when they're trying to pretend they don't see you even though you're literally 10 feet away. She turned back to the gas pump like it was the most fascinating piece of machinery she'd ever encountered, studying that little digital display like it held the secrets to cold fusion. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going away. This wasn't some temporary insanity where Rachel would wake up one morning, look at Tyler drooling on his pillow, and think, "What the hell have I done?" No, this was my new reality. Living in a city where every corner could potentially feature a live performance of Tyler and Rachel's greatest hits, starring the two people who'd basically tag-teamed my self-esteem into the ground. I started having these paranoid fantasies where the entire city was conspiring against me. Like maybe there was some secret newsletter going around. Attention citizens. Marcus Hall's wife left him for his unemployed brother. Make sure to schedule all your public appearances accordingly for maximum awkwardness. The grocery store, the bank, the post office. Everywhere I went felt like a potential ambush waiting to happen. So when my boss, Dave, called me into his office on a Thursday morning and said, "Marcus, how would you feel about a transfer to our Chicago office?" I probably looked like he'd just offered me a winning lottery ticket and a free trip to Disney World rolled into one. Dave was this old-school guy who believed in 3 martini lunches and treating his employees like actual human beings instead of corporate robots, which was basically unheard of in today's soul-crushing business world. Chicago, I said, trying not to sound too desperate even though I was internally doing cartwheels. What's the situation there? Well, we're expanding operations, need someone reliable to help manage the transition. It'd be a promotion, actually, better salary, better benefits. And you'd be leading a team instead of just following orders from idiots in suits who've never actually done the job. He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Plus, I heard through the grapevine that you might be looking for a change of scenery. The grapevine. That's corporate speak for everyone knows your personal life imploded spectacularly, and we all feel bad for you. But honestly, at that point, I didn't care if my marital disasters had become office water cooler gossip. If people wanted to discuss my failed relationships over their sad desk salads, that was fine by me, as long as I didn't have to be in the same zip code to hear about it. When would I start? I asked, already mentally packing my boxes. 2 weeks, Dave said. Think you can handle that? Handle it? Dave, I could pack my entire life into a U-Haul faster than Tyler could finish a bag of Doritos. Which, for the record, was pretty damn fast. The guy had the eating speed of a competitive hot dog champion when it came to junk food. That afternoon, I went home to my empty apartment. The same apartment where Rachel and I had been playing house just a month ago, now feeling like a museum exhibit titled Things That Used to Matter, and started making lists. What to pack, what to sell, what to throw away because it reminded me too much of my old life where I thought I had things figured out. The weird thing about packing up your life is how much stuff turns out to be completely meaningless. All those little decorative items Rachel had bought to make the place look homey. Ceramic bowls that never held anything, candles that never got lit, throw pillows that served no purpose except to annoy you when you wanted to sit on the couch. I bagged most of it up for Goodwill, figuring some other couple could enjoy pretending these random objects would somehow make their relationship stronger. But then there was the apartment itself. My apartment. The place I'd scraped and saved to afford, worked overtime shifts to pay for, stressed about every month when the mortgage payment came due. The one thing in my life that was actually, legally, completely mine. Selling it crossed my mind for about 5 minutes, because Chicago real estate prices weren't exactly what you'd call affordable, and liquidating my biggest asset would have given me a nice cushion to start over. But then I thought about Mom and Dad, still crammed into that shoebox studio apartment with neighbors who apparently thought domestic violence was an evening entertainment option. These people had raised me, dealt with Tyler's chaos for decades, and were now stuck listening to Mr. and Mrs. Anger Management next door reenact scenes from WWE at all hours of the night. So I made what seemed like a generous, responsible decision at the time. I'd let my parents stay in my apartment while I was gone. They'd cover utilities, keep the place maintained, and I'd still own it when I was ready to come back. It was win-win, really. They'd get a decent place to live, and I'd have a safety net if Chicago didn't work out. So there I was, standing in my living room on moving day, holding the keys to my apartment like I was passing the Olympic torch to the next generation of disappointment. Mom and Dad were looking around the place with these wide eyes, like they'd just been handed the keys to Buckingham Palace instead of a 2-bedroom apartment with carpet stains and a kitchen faucet that had been threatening to fall off for the past 6 months. Now, Marcus, Mom said, clutching her purse like someone might try to snatch it right there in my own living room. Are you absolutely sure about this? We don't want to be a burden. This coming from the woman who'd spent the last 34 years treating me like a walking ATM whenever Tyler needed something. But sure, now she's worried about being a burden. It's fine, Mom, I said, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Just think of it as house sitting, except you get to escape your psychotic neighbors, and I get to know someone's keeping an eye on the place. I jingled the keys in front of them like I was trying to hypnotize a couple of cats. The only rules are simple. Cover the utilities, don't burn the place down, and for the love of all that's holy, don't go giving it to Tyler. Or Rachel. Dad nodded so enthusiastically I thought his head might fall off. Of course not, son. This is your place. We're just grateful you're letting us stay here while you're in Chicago. He looked around the apartment like he was memorizing every detail, probably already planning where he'd put his lazy boy and his collection of fishing magazines that nobody would ever actually read. Mom was doing that thing where she tears up, but tries to hide it, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue from her purse. "You're such a good son, Marcus. After everything that's happened with Rachel and Tyler." She trailed off, because apparently even my mother couldn't figure out how to put a positive spin on my wife running off with my brother. "Yeah, well," I said, shouldering my duffel bag and trying to look like a guy who had his life together instead of someone fleeing the scene of his own personal disaster. "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?" Which is basically what people say when they've run out of actual helpful things to offer, but still feel like they need to contribute something to the conversation. I handed over the keys with what I thought was appropriate ceremony, considering I was basically handing over the deed to my financial future to two people who once gave away my bicycle because the neighbor kid really wanted one for Christmas. But they looked so grateful, so relieved to finally have a decent place to live, that I felt like maybe I was finally doing something right for once. "Remember," I said, pointing at them like a school principal laying down the law, "this is still my apartment. I'm not giving it away, I'm not selling it, and I'm definitely not transferring the deed to anyone whose name rhymes with Tyler. We clear?" They nodded like a couple of bobbleheads on a dashboard, all smiles and promises. These were the same people who'd nodded just as enthusiastically when they promised Tyler wouldn't touch my stuff as kids. But hey, maybe 30 years of parenting had taught them something about boundaries. Spoiler alert, it hadn't. The flight to Chicago was like stepping into a different universe. Nobody knew me there. Nobody knew about Tyler and Rachel's epic romance. And nobody felt the need to give me those sympathetic looks that said, "Oh, you're that guy whose life fell apart in the most embarrassing way possible." It was beautiful, really. For the first time in months, I could walk into a Starbucks without wondering if the barista was judging my life choices. My new job was everything Dave had promised and more. Instead of being the guy who took orders from people who'd probably struggle to find their own office without GPS, I was actually managing a team of competent adults who treated me like I knew what I was doing. Revolutionary concept, really. The salary bump was nice too, enough that I could afford an apartment where the neighbors weren't training for careers in professional wrestling every night. Chicago itself was like a breath of fresh air after the suffocating small-town drama I'd left behind. The city was big enough that you could reinvent yourself every day if you wanted to, full of people who were too busy with their own problems to care about yours. I found a decent apartment in a building where the most exciting drama was whether the elevator would work on any given Tuesday. For 5 whole months, life was actually good. I made friends with my coworkers, started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual dinners with women who didn't know my family history and therefore couldn't judge me for it. I joined a gym where nobody tried to psychoanalyze my workout routine, discovered restaurants that served food I couldn't pronounce but tasted amazing, and generally started feeling like a functional human being again. My parents would call every couple of weeks to check in, always with glowing reports about how much they loved the apartment, how quiet the neighbors were, how grateful they were for my generosity. "It's like a dream come true," Mom would gush, and I'd feel this warm, fuzzy feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd done something genuinely good for people I cared about. Tyler and Rachel became distant memories, like characters from a bad movie I'd watched once and mostly forgotten. Sure, sometimes I'd catch myself wondering what they were up to, but it was more like wondering about old high school classmates, curiosity without any real emotional investment. I started thinking that maybe this was how normal people live their lives, without constant drama and family members stealing each other's significant others. I should have known better. I should have remembered that in the Marcus Hall saga, moments of peace and happiness are basically just the calm before the storm, like those horror movies where everything seems fine right before the serial killer jumps out of the closet. But no, I was feeling optimistic about life for the first time in years. I actually started believing that maybe karma was finally giving me a break, that maybe I'd paid my dues and could now enjoy some well-deserved peace and prosperity. What an absolute moron I was. Sunday mornings in Chicago had become my personal slice of heaven. I'd sleep in until whatever time my body decided it was done being unconscious, make coffee that didn't taste like it was filtered through a gym sock, and settle into my couch with my laptop for some quality social media scrolling. You know, that mindless activity where you pretend to care about your college roommates' vacation photos and your high school acquaintances' kids who all look exactly the same in their little soccer uniforms. It was one of those lazy Sunday mornings in early October, the kind where the weather couldn't decide if it wanted to be fall or still summer. So it just settled on that perfect temperature where you could wear shorts or a sweater and either choice would work. I was about 3 cups of coffee deep into my day, scrolling through the usual Facebook nonsense. Someone's aunt sharing conspiracy theories about vegetables, a former coworker posting gym selfies that nobody asked for, the standard collection of political arguments between people who definitely shouldn't be allowed internet access. Then I saw it. At first, my brain didn't process what I was looking at. It was like one of those optical illusions where you stare at something for a few seconds before your eyes finally focus and you realize you're looking at a picture of your own personal nightmare. There, right there on my laptop screen, was a photo of Tyler. My brother Tyler, standing in what was very clearly my kitchen, grinning like he'd just discovered the cure for cancer instead of managed to successfully operate a camera phone. But it wasn't just Tyler in the photo. Oh no, that would have been too simple for the ongoing disaster that was my family. Rachel was there too, wrapped around his arm like she was afraid he might float away if she didn't maintain physical contact. She was wearing this sundress I'd never seen before, probably because she'd never felt the need to dress up for me. And her hair was done in one of those effortless styles that actually takes 2 hours and about 47 different hair products to achieve. They were both beaming at the camera with the kind of happiness that makes you want to throw things at walls. You know that look, the smug satisfaction of people who think they've gotten away with something clever, like kids who just successfully convinced their parents that the dog ate their homework. Tyler had his chest puffed out in that way guys do when they think they're hot shit, and Rachel looked like she was posing for a magazine spread about how to steal your husband's life and look fabulous doing it. But the caption, oh, the fucking caption was what really sent me over the edge. Many thanks to my parents for giving us this apartment. Finally our own place with my wife. #blessed, #new beginnings, #family. I read it 3 times before my brain fully processed the words. Many thanks to his parents? His parents? Last time I checked, those were my parents too, and more importantly, that was my goddamn apartment they were standing in. My kitchen, with the cabinets I'd installed myself after watching approximately 17 YouTube tutorials. My living room, where I'd spent countless evenings after work trying to decompress from the daily grind of adult responsibility. And his wife? Excuse me, Tyler, but unless you figured out how to travel back in time and marry Rachel before I did, she was my wife first. The audacity of this guy was truly spectacular. It was like watching someone steal your car and then thank your parents for giving them a ride. I stared at that post for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, my thumb hovering over the screen like I was trying to decide whether to screenshot it or throw my laptop out the window. The rational part of my brain, the part that usually keeps me from making life-altering decisions based on pure rage, was telling me to close the laptop, go for a walk, maybe call a friend and vent about this latest development in the Tyler and Rachel show. But the other part of my brain, the part that had been accumulating years of frustration and disappointment, was screaming for blood. This was the same brother who'd spent our childhood systematically destroying everything I cared about. The same guy who couldn't hold a job at McDonald's, but somehow thought he deserved to live in my apartment. And now he was publicly thanking our parents for giving him a place that I'd worked my ass off to afford. I took screenshots. Multiple screenshots. I zoomed in on Tyler's stupid, satisfied face and took more screenshots. I screenshotted the caption with all its grammatical errors and misplaced hashtags. I probably took enough screenshots to wallpaper my entire Chicago apartment, but I needed proof. I needed documentation of this spectacular act of family betrayal, because something told me I was going to need evidence later. The more I stared at that photo, the more details I noticed that made my blood pressure spike. There was Tyler, standing in my kitchen like he owned the place, which apparently he now thought he did. The kitchen where I'd made countless meals, where Rachel and I had shared morning coffee back when I thought we had a future together, where I'd stood many nights wondering if adult life was supposed to feel this hard all the time. I could see into the living room in the background, and there was my couch, the one I'd saved up for months to buy, the one I'd assembled myself with nothing but determination and an Allen wrench that was probably designed by someone who hated humanity. Tyler and Rachel were living in my space, sleeping in what was probably my bedroom, using my address to get their mail forwarded. The hashtags were particularly infuriating. #blessed. Blessed by what exactly? by the incredible fortune of having parents who give away other people's property. Hashtag new beginnings. The only thing that was beginning was my understanding of just how spectacularly my family could screw me over. Hashtag family. Yeah, that's rich coming from the guy who stole his brother's wife and is now living in his brother's apartment. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, coffee growing cold in my hand, trying to process this new level of betrayal. It was like discovering that not only had your house been robbed, but the thieves had also sent you a thank you card with pictures of them enjoying your stolen stuff. My phone was sitting right there on the coffee table, and I had this overwhelming urge to call my parents and ask them what the hell they thought they were doing. But something told me to wait, to think this through, to maybe figure out my next move before I said something I couldn't take back. Because one thing was becoming crystal clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. You know what they say about curiosity killing the cat? Well, apparently I'm part feline, because after seeing that first Facebook post, I couldn't stop myself from diving deeper into the social media rabbit hole of my own personal hell. It was like picking at a scab. You know it's going to hurt. You know it's probably going to make things worse, but something compulsive in your brain just keeps telling you to keep going. So there I was, scrolling through Tyler's Facebook profile like some kind of digital stalker, except instead of being creepy, I was just trying to figure out what the hell had happened to my life while I was busy being responsible in Chicago. And let me tell you, the deeper I went, the more I realized that this wasn't just some spontaneous decision by my parents to help out their younger son. This was a full-scale operation, complete with documentation that would make a real estate agent weep with joy. The photos were everywhere. Tyler and Rachel had apparently been documenting their domestic bliss like they were running for couple of the year or something. There was Rachel in my kitchen, attempting to cook what looked like chicken breast but had the charred appearance of something that had been through a house fire. She was wearing an apron I'd never seen before, probably because when we were married, her idea of cooking was heating up lean cuisine in the microwave and calling it meal prep. The caption read, "First home-cooked meal in our new place. Still learning, but Tyler says it's perfect." Red heart perfect? The chicken in that photo looked like it could be used as a hockey puck. But there was Tyler in the background, giving her a thumbs up like she'd just recreated a five-star restaurant experience instead of committing what appeared to be a felony against poultry. Then there were the living room photos. Multiple living room photos. Tyler sprawled across my couch like he was posing for a furniture catalog, remote control in hand, probably watching some show about people doing dangerous things for money because that's about as intellectual as his entertainment preferences got. Rachel curled up next to him, both of them looking cozy as hell in my living room, under the lamp I'd bought, surrounded by the furniture I'd carefully selected and paid for over months of overtime shifts. One photo showed them having what appeared to be a movie night, complete with popcorn and those fancy sodas that cost more than regular sodas but don't actually taste any better. The caption was pure Tyler. "Movie night with my gorgeous wife. Life is good." Popcorn clapperboard. Life is good? Of course life is good when you're living rent-free in someone else's apartment with someone else's ex-wife. You absolute walnut. But the family photos were what really sent me over the edge. There they were, Tyler and Rachel, posing with my parents like they were the fucking Brady Bunch. Mom and Dad looked happier than I'd seen them in years, beaming like they'd just won the lottery and solved world hunger simultaneously. Dad had his arm around Tyler, looking proud as hell, while Mom was practically glowing as she hugged Rachel like she was the daughter she'd always wanted. The caption on that particular gem read, "Sunday dinner with the family. So grateful for parents who support our love. Red heart family man woman girl boy support our love? What about supporting the son who actually worked his ass off to give them a decent place to live? What about the son who didn't steal his brother's wife and then have the audacity to broadcast it on social media like it was some kind of romantic triumph?" I kept scrolling, because apparently I'm a masochist who enjoys psychological torture. There were photos of Tyler fixing things around the apartment, and I use the term fixing very loosely here, because Tyler's mechanical skills were about as advanced as a goldfish's understanding of quantum physics. In one photo, he was holding a wrench near my bathroom sink, looking like he was performing surgery instead of attempting basic plumbing. The caption, "Honey-do list complete. Taking care of our home. Wrench flexed biceps. Our home. Our fucking home." The audacity was breathtaking, really. It was like watching someone steal your identity, and then send you progress reports about how much they were enjoying being you. Rachel had her own collection of domestic goddess posts that made me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married. Photos of her organizing my closets. Sorry, they're closets, with those little labels and storage containers that cost more than most people's grocery budgets. Pictures of her decorating with plants that she'd probably kill within a month because Rachel's gardening skills were about as impressive as Tyler's career prospects. The worst part was how happy they looked. Not fake happy. Not, we're trying to convince everyone we're happy, but genuinely, sickeningly, authentically happy. Like they'd found their perfect match in each other, which was particularly insulting considering I'd thought Rachel was my perfect match not that long ago. I found photos from their grocery shopping trips, because apparently even buying milk and bread was worth documenting when you were living your best life in someone else's apartment. Tyler pushing the cart while Rachel checked items off a list. Both of them grinning like they'd just figured out the secret to eternal happiness. The domesticity was nauseating, especially since I knew that Tyler's previous idea of meal planning was making sure he had enough hot pockets to last through the weekend. Finally, I couldn't take any more. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, my back was cramping from hunching over my laptop, and I was pretty sure I'd developed a permanent scowl that was going to require plastic surgery to fix. I grabbed my phone and called Mom, because if I didn't get some answers soon, I was going to have a stroke right there in my Chicago apartment. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, and her voice had that guilty tone that mothers get when they know they've been caught doing something they shouldn't. "Hi, honey. How are things in Chicago?" "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice level and failing miserably. "What's this about you giving Tyler my apartment?" There was a pause that lasted approximately 17 years, followed by a sigh that could have powered a wind turbine. "Honey, he needed it more. You're doing fine out there." "Needed it more? He needed it more?" Translation: "We like the kid who stole your wife better than we like you, and we're not even going to pretend otherwise." After my mother's spectacular display of family loyalty over the phone, I did what any rational, level-headed person would do. I booked the first flight back home and started planning my dramatic entrance like I was the star of my own revenge movie. The flight was Saturday morning, which gave me exactly enough time to stew in my own anger while practicing various versions of what I was going to say when I showed up at my own damn apartment. I spent Friday night in my Chicago apartment, laying out my best suit like I was preparing for battle. And honestly, that's exactly what this was: psychological warfare against people who thought they could just redistribute my property like it was community pizza at a college party. I chose my navy blue suit, the one that made me look like I had my shit together even when my life was falling apart, paired with a tie that said, "I'm here on business, and that business is reclaiming what's mine." The documents were the most important part of my battle plan. I had the original deed, mortgage papers, tax records, insurance documents, and every piece of paper that proved I owned that apartment. I organized them in a manila folder like I was preparing for the most important presentation of my life, which, considering the circumstances, I basically was. If Tyler and my parents wanted to play games with property ownership, I was going to show up with receipts. Literally. Saturday evening, I took a cab from the airport straight to my apartment, because calling it Tyler's place or their place was never going to happen. The sun was setting, casting this golden light over the building that I'd once thought of as my sanctuary, my escape from the world's bullshit. Now it looked like the scene of a crime, specifically the crime of grand theft apartment. As I walked up the stairs to the second floor, I could hear music coming from inside. Not just any music, but loud, party music, the kind of bass-heavy stuff that probably had the neighbors wondering if someone was testing earthquake equipment. There were voices, laughter, the unmistakable sound of people having a good time at what was apparently a celebration of some kind. I stood outside my own front door for a moment, listening to the party happening inside my own apartment, and felt this surge of rage so pure, it was almost beautiful. These people weren't just living in my place. They were throwing parties in it, inviting guests over to celebrate their new life in stolen property. The audacity was so complete, so breathtaking, that I almost had to admire it. I knocked on the door. Not a polite, gentle knock, but the kind of authoritative bang that says, "Open up, this is official business." The music didn't stop, but I could hear conversation dying down, probably people wondering who the hell was knocking on the door during their little celebration. The door opened, and there was Tyler, holding a beer bottle and wearing a button-down shirt that actually looked clean and pressed. For a split second, he looked like he'd seen a ghost, his face going through this rapid transformation from party host to deer in headlights. His mouth felt open slightly, and he just stared at me like I was some kind of apparition that had materialized on his doorstep. "Marcus?" he said, his voice cracking slightly like he was going through puberty again. "What are you doing here?" "Funny question," I said, pushing past him into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. Considering this is my address. Walking into that apartment was like stepping into an alternate reality where everything looked familiar but wrong. My furniture was still there, but it had been rearranged in ways that made no sense. My coffee table was pushed against the wall, my couch was facing a different direction, and there were decorative touches that screamed Rachel's Pinterest board come to life. Throw pillows with inspirational sayings, scented candles that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and little picture frames with photos of Tyler and Rachel looking blissfully happy. But the real kicker was the people. At least 20 guests were scattered around my living room, holding drinks and looking like they'd been having the time of their lives until I showed up to crash the party. I recognized some of them. Tyler's buddies from high school who'd never quite figured out how to be adults, a few of Rachel's co-workers from her marketing job, and several family friends who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Rachel was standing near the kitchen, holding a champagne glass and wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. When she saw me, she froze like a statue, her face going pale under whatever expensive makeup she was wearing. For a moment, our eyes met across the room, and I could see her mentally calculating how quickly she could disappear into the bathroom or maybe just spontaneously combust. The entire party had gone silent, everyone staring at me like I was an unwelcome ghost from Christmas past. You could practically hear the collective, "oh shit," running through everyone's minds as they tried to figure out what exactly was happening and whether they should be calling the police or just quietly backing toward the exits. That's when Mom materialized from somewhere in the crowd, wearing her best public appearance, outfit, and a facial expression that could have curdled milk. She hissed at me in that way mothers do when they're trying to discipline their children without making a scene in front of company. "Marcus, don't embarrass us." Don't embarrass them? That was rich. I looked around the room at all these people celebrating in my apartment, drinking champagne and eating what looked like catered food, all gathered to celebrate Tyler and Rachel's new life and property that wasn't theirs, and my mother was worried about me embarrassing the family. I pulled out my manila folder and held it up like I was displaying evidence in a courtroom. "Embarrass you?" I said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Lady, you already did that when you gave away my apartment like it was a box of Girl Scout cookies." The silence in the room was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Several guests were already reaching for their coats. The silence that followed my Girl Scout cookies comment lasted exactly long enough for everyone in the room to fully process what was happening. And then Tyler, bless his stupid, predictable heart, decided to step up and play the role of alpha male defending his territory. He puffed out his chest like a peacock trying to impress a mate, except instead of beautiful feathers, all he had was a wrinkled button-down shirt and the kind of false confidence that comes from drinking beer at your own party. "This is our place now, Marcus," he said, trying to make his voice sound deeper and more authoritative than it actually was. "You left. You moved to Chicago. You can't just show up here and act like you still live here. Our place." There it was again, that magical phrase that apparently transformed stolen property into legitimate real estate. I had to admire Tyler's commitment to this fantasy he'd constructed where abandoning your property automatically transferred ownership to whoever happened to be squatting there. It was like some twisted version of Finders Keepers, except instead of finding a $20 bill on the sidewalk, he'd found an entire apartment and decided it was his now. "I left you my parents, Tyler," I said, opening my manila folder and pulling out the deed like I was drawing a sword. "Not my property. Big difference, champ." The word champ came out with all the sarcasm I could muster, which, after months of building up resentment, was considerable. See, when normal people go on business trips or relocate for work, their apartments don't magically transfer ownership to their freeloading relatives. The guests were starting to get that uncomfortable feeling you get when you realize you've accidentally walked into someone else's family drama. I could see them glancing toward the door, probably calculating the fastest escape route that didn't involve climbing out windows or hiding in closets. A few of the smarter ones were already putting down their drinks and reaching for their jackets, because nothing kills a party vibe faster than property disputes and sibling warfare. Tyler's face was getting red, that blotchy color he used to turn when we were kids, and he'd get caught breaking something. You don't understand, Marcus. We needed this place. Rachel and I are starting our life together, and what? I interrupted, because I wasn't about to listen to a speech about their beautiful love story when it was taking place in my living room. And you figured you'd just take what you wanted because that's worked out so well for you in the past. I gestured around the room, taking in all the guests who were pretending not to eavesdrop while obviously hanging on every word. By the way, folks, fun fact, Tyler's wife was mine first. Hope the chicken wings taste less awkward now. That comment hit the room like a bomb going off in a library. Several people actually choked on their drinks, and I watched Cousin Jenny, who'd always been the family gossip, lean over to whisper something urgent to her husband. The whispers started spreading through the room like wildfire, because apparently not everyone had gotten the full backstory about how Tyler and Rachel's epic romance had begun. Rachel, who'd been doing her best impression of a deer in headlights up until this point, finally found her voice. "Marcus, please don't make this harder than it has to be," she said, her words slightly slurred either from champagne or stress. "What Tyler and I have is real. What you and I had, it just wasn't working." Wasn't working? I stared at her, trying to process this revisionist history where our marriage had been some kind of failed experiment instead of a relationship that ended when she decided my brother was a better option. "Right, Rachel. It wasn't working. That's why you left me a text message instead of, oh, I don't know, having an actual conversation about it like adults do." The crowd was thinning out rapidly now. Half the guests had grabbed their coats and were mumbling things like, "Great party. Thanks for having us," while speed-walking toward the door like the building was on fire. The other half were pretending to be fascinated by their phones, probably texting other people about the drama they were witnessing firsthand. Dad tried to step in, probably hoping to play peacemaker like he used to when Tyler and I would fight over toys as kids. "Now, boys, let's not air our dirty laundry in front of everyone," he said, looking around nervously at the remaining guests. "This is a family matter." "Family matter?" I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Dad, when family members start redistributing each other's real estate without permission, it stops being a family matter and starts being a legal matter." I held up the deed again, waving it like a flag. "Unless someone can show me paperwork proving I signed this place over to Tyler, then this is still my apartment, and all of you are trespassing." Tyler was getting desperate now, that panicked look people get when they realize their brilliant plan wasn't as foolproof as they thought. "But Mom and Dad said we could have it. They're your parents too. They had the right to. They had the right to house sit." I cut him off. "They had the right to cover utilities and not burn the place down. They did not have the right to give it away like a charity donation, especially not to you." I looked around the room at the remaining guests, who were all avoiding eye contact like they were witnesses to a crime. And they definitely didn't have the right to throw housewarming parties for people who don't actually own the house. Mom was looking more desperate by the minute, probably realizing that her plan to quietly transfer ownership through guilt and family pressure wasn't working out as smoothly as she'd hoped. "Marcus, honey, we thought you were settled in Chicago. We thought you'd moved on." "Moved on from what, Mom? My apartment? My mortgage payments? My property taxes?" I shook my head, genuinely amazed by the logic. Just because I took a job in another city doesn't mean I gave up everything I owned. That's not how real estate works. That's not how anything works. The party was officially dead now. The remaining guests were filing out like mourners leaving a funeral, probably already planning how they were going to tell this story to everyone they knew. Tyler and Rachel's housewarming party had turned into a public humiliation session, and I hadn't even gotten to the good part yet. Monday morning arrived like a gift from the universe, because nothing says time to destroy your enemies like a fresh cup of coffee and a lawyer who thinks your family drama is the funniest thing he's heard all year. I met my buddy Sean at this little cafe downtown, the kind of place where lawyers go to caffeinate themselves before ruining people's lives in the most professional way possible. Sean had been my roommate in college back when our biggest legal concerns were whether we could talk our way out of parking tickets, so he knew exactly how spectacularly dysfunctional my family could be. I walked into the cafe carrying my manila folder like it contained state secrets and spotted Sean immediately. He was the guy in the expensive suit trying not to laugh while reading something on his phone. When he saw me approaching, he looked up with this grin that could only mean one thing. He was about to enjoy the hell out of this case. "Marcus, my man," he said, standing up to shake my hand like we were closing a business deal instead of meeting to discuss how my brother had essentially stolen my apartment. "I have to say, when you texted me about this situation, I thought you were joking. But then I looked up your property records, and holy shit, this is actually happening." I sat down across from him, sliding the folder across the table like we were conducting some kind of covert operation. "Sean, I need you to tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me that my family can't just give away my apartment because they feel like it." Sean opened the folder and started flipping through my documents, his grin getting wider with each page. "Marcus, buddy, they're not just wrong. They're so spectacularly wrong that I'm actually impressed. It's like watching someone try to argue that gravity doesn't apply to them because they really, really want to fly." He held up the deed, examining it like it was a work of art. "This is beautiful, man. Clear title, no liens, mortgage payments up to date. You own this place free and clear, legally speaking. But what about the fact that they've been living there? Doesn't that give them any rights?" I asked, because my knowledge of property law came entirely from legal dramas on TV, and those aren't exactly known for their accuracy. Sean nearly choked on his coffee. "Rights? Marcus, they're squatters. Fancy squatters with family connections, but still squatters. The fact that your parents gave them permission doesn't mean anything because your parents don't own the property. It's like me giving someone permission to drive your car. Sure, I can say they have my blessing, but since it's not my car, my permission is worth exactly nothing." He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of my documents, probably for his case files, but also possibly because he wanted to share this story with other lawyers who would appreciate the pure absurdity of it all. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, switching into full lawyer mode. "We're going to file an unlawful detainer action, which is fancy legal speak for get the hell out of my client's apartment. We'll give them 30 days notice, which is more generous than they deserve, and then if they don't vacate voluntarily, we'll have the sheriff's department escort them out." 30 days, I said, thinking about Tyler and Rachel having another month to play house in my apartment. "Can't we make it faster?" "Trust me, 30 days is lightning speed in the legal world," Sean said, already pulling out his laptop to start drafting paperwork. "Plus, it makes us look reasonable and responsible, which judges love. We're not being vindictive or petty. We're just asking for our property back through proper legal channels." The next few hours were like watching a master craftsman at work. Sean drafted eviction notices with the kind of precision that comes from years of legal training and a genuine love of bureaucratic destruction. We sent official papers to Tyler, Rachel, and, just for the sheer entertainment value, my parents, because apparently being accessories to apartment theft was now a family affair. My mother called me about 4 hours after the process server delivered the papers, and I could hear the panic in her voice from the moment I answered the phone. "Marcus, honey, what are these legal papers Tyler just brought over? There must be some mistake." "No mistake, Mom," I said, feeling surprisingly calm considering I was essentially declaring war on my own family. "Those are eviction notices. You remember my apartment? The one I own? The one you gave to Tyler without asking me?" "Yeah, well, I'd like it back now." "But Marcus, how can you do this to us? We're family." She was crying now, which probably would have made me feel guilty if I hadn't spent the last few months watching my brother and ex-wife play house in my living room. "Same way you did it to me, Mom," I replied. "Only I have paperwork to back up my position, and you have." "What exactly?" "Good intentions and a fundamental misunderstanding of property law." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I thought she might have hung up, but then I heard her sniffling and talking to someone in the background, probably Dad, trying to figure out how their brilliant plan had gone so spectacularly wrong. Within a week, Tyler and Rachel had hired their own lawyer, some guy who probably specialized in hopeless causes and lost cases. Sean found this development absolutely hilarious, especially when their attorney tried to argue that I had somehow promised the apartment to Tyler through some kind of implied family agreement. Their lawyer actually tried to claim that your moving to Chicago constituted abandonment of the property, Sean told me over lunch. barely able to contain his laughter. I asked him if that meant everyone who goes on vacation automatically forfeits their homes, and he didn't have an answer for that. The case went before a judge on a Thursday morning, and Sean showed up armed with mortgage receipts, tax records, utility bills, and a sarcastic attitude that could cut glass. Their lawyer tried to make some argument about family relationships and verbal agreements, but you could see the judge's expression getting more skeptical with every word. "Your Honor," Sean said when it was his turn to speak, "my client owns this property. He has owned it for 3 years. He has documentation proving ownership, and he has been paying all associated costs. The defendants are claiming ownership based on, well, I'm not entirely sure what they're claiming ownership based on. Facebook posts, maybe." Even the judge smirked at that comment. The whole proceeding took less than an hour, and by the time we walked out of the courthouse, Tyler and Rachel had exactly 30 days to find somewhere else to live. 30 days later, I was sitting in my Chicago apartment, sipping coffee and waiting for Sean's phone call like a kid waiting for Christmas morning. He'd volunteered to oversee the move-out process personally, partly because it was his professional duty as my attorney, but mostly because he wanted front row seats to what he'd started calling the Great Apartment Reclamation of 2024. I have to admit, I was tempted to drive back and watch the show myself. But there's something to be said for maintaining your dignity and letting your lawyer handle the dirty work while you enjoy the sweet taste of victory from a safe distance. The call came at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Sean's voice was practically vibrating with barely contained laughter when I picked up. "Marcus, buddy, you are not going to believe what I just witnessed. I've been practicing law for 8 years, and I have never seen anything quite like this train wreck." "Give me the details," I said, settling back into my couch with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for lottery drawings or the season finale of your favorite show. "I want to hear everything." "Okay, so I show up at the apartment at noon with the sheriff's deputy, right? Professional, by the book, everything nice and legal. Tyler answers the door looking like he hasn't slept in a week, which honestly makes sense considering he's been facing the reality that his free ride was coming to an end. Sean paused, probably for dramatic effect, because lawyers love their dramatic pauses. The first thing he says to me is, "Can't we work something out? Maybe Marcus would be willing to sell us the place." I nearly choked on my coffee. He wanted to buy my apartment? With what money? His extensive collection of video games and empty pizza boxes? That's exactly what I asked him. Sean was clearly enjoying this way too much. So I said, "Tyler, do you have a down payment?" And this genius looks at me with a straight face and says, "Well, we've been living here for months, so that should count as something, right? Like paying rent backwards or some shit." The mental image of Tyler trying to negotiate a real estate deal while being evicted was almost too beautiful to contemplate. This was the same guy who once tried to return a half-eaten sandwich to a deli because he decided he didn't like turkey anymore. His understanding of how transactions work was about as sophisticated as a toddler's grasp of international finance. "But wait, it gets better," Sean continued. "So while Tyler's trying to convince me that squatting should count as a down payment, Rachel comes out of the bedroom with mascara running down her face like she's auditioning for a soap opera. And she starts crying. Not just regular crying, but that ugly crying where people make noises that sound like dying animals. I tried to picture Rachel, who'd always prided herself on looking perfectly put together even when she was having a breakdown, reduced to the kind of crying that ruins makeup and dignity simultaneously. There was definitely a part of me that felt a tiny bit bad for her. But that part was quickly overruled by the larger part that remembered how she dumped me via text message to run off with my brother. She keeps saying things like, "This is our home now, and you can't just throw us out on the street," Sean went on. And I'm thinking, lady, you've had 30 days to figure this out. It's not like we sprung this on you yesterday. Plus, you're not exactly homeless. You're just going to have to find a place you can actually afford instead of living rent-free in stolen property. "What about my parents?" I asked, because I was genuinely curious about how Mom and Dad were handling the collapse of their brilliant apartment redistribution scheme. "Oh man, your parents," Sean said, and I could hear him shaking his head. "They showed up right as we were getting started, probably to provide moral support or witness protection or something. Your mom took one look at the sheriff's deputy and started crying harder than Rachel. And your dad? He just stood there looking like someone had told him that football was canceled forever. The image of my parents watching their plan fall apart in real time was oddly satisfying. These were the same people who'd spent my entire childhood teaching me about consequences and responsibility. And now they were learning firsthand that actions have consequences even when you're related to the people you're screwing over. Did they say anything? I asked, morbidly curious about what kind of justification they might offer for their role in this disaster. Your mom kept asking if there was anything she could do to fix this, like maybe if she apologized hard enough, the laws of property ownership would suddenly change, Sean said. And Tyler, get this, Tyler actually had the balls to curse at me. Called me a corporate asshole who doesn't understand family. So I reminded him that I was just the lawyer, and that if he had a problem with being evicted from property he didn't own, he should probably take it up with his brother. I had to laugh at that. Tyler calling Sean a corporate asshole was like a goldfish calling a shark a show-off. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, especially coming from someone who'd just spent months living off someone else's generosity and hard work. So they're actually out? I asked, because I needed confirmation that this nightmare was really over. Oh, they're out, Sean confirmed. Took them until almost 6 p.m., but they got all their stuff loaded into a moving truck that looked like it had been through several wars. Tyler kept muttering under his breath about family loyalty and blood being thicker than water, which was pretty rich considering the circumstances. But then Sean's tone shifted slightly, and I could tell there was more bad news coming. Marcus, I have to warn you about the condition of the place. They didn't exactly leave it in move-in ready condition. How bad are we talking? I asked, though I was already mentally preparing myself for the worst. Well, let's just say Tyler's idea of home maintenance was apparently ignore problems until they become someone else's problems. There are holes in the walls that look like someone tried to hang pictures with a sledgehammer, carpet stains that might actually be classified as biohazards, and somehow they managed to remove 3 light fixtures. I have no idea why anyone would steal light fixtures, but here we are. The damage didn't surprise me as much as it probably should have. Tyler had never been what you'd call handy around the house, and his idea of cleaning was moving dirty dishes from one counter to another. The fact that he'd managed to actively damage the place while living there rent-free was almost impressive in its sheer incompetence.